Okay, I'm gonna do part 2. Life in the Temple. In the end, Ferdinand made it exceedingly clear that I was to show him anything I wrote going forward, since my common sense was apparently anything but common. Yeah, I think we kind of established that at the moment you started talking about how you wanted to help people, and without, and all the other stuff that was happening before with Haas. I mean, they should have known that from long ago. I agreed, of course, and put my oh-so-shameless novel in a sealed box after he left. He had ordered me to burn it, but perhaps one day it would see the light of day. Fran, summon Ella and Hugo from the kitchen, I said. I wish to speak to them about what was just decided. Lady Rosemine, I would rather you communicate with the chefs through an attendant. My apologies, Fran, but I think it's best that I speak to them directly. You and the other attendants know very little about marriage, no? Fran went to the kitchen, unable to protest further. He and the others could speak for me in matters of work, but their lack of knowledge about life in the lower city put them at a loss when it came to marriage. Oh, yeah, they know nothing about that. Excuse us, Ella and Hugo said respectfully as they entered, very clearly tense. Fran explained that I would be speaking to them directly and then stepped down. Since Ella and Hugo were commoners, my 2 guard knights were standing close behind me. You have both served me well in the Royal Academy, I said. I imagine that making so much food every day has been quite the challenge. The students were all overjoyed to eat it. You will most likely continue to accompany me whenever I return to the Royal Academy, and I look forward to your continued good service. Now, as for your marriage... Upon hearing this, their faces stiffened, and they swallowed audibly. There is no problem with the marriage itself, I continued, smiling in an attempt to ease their concerns. If you are to be wed this summer, you have my blessing. Thank you ever so very much. That said, we must discuss your living arrangements. There are married servants in the castle, so I will request quarters there for your use. But I cannot create a room for a married couple here in the temple. You will either have to stay in separate rooms, as you have been, or rent a room in the lower city and commute from there, as arduous as that may be. I should note that if you do choose the latter, you will not lose your rooms in the temple, so you may still rest here during busy periods. I glanced at Fran, signaling him to bring over the money we had prepared for them. Hugo inhaled with wide eyes as he saw the bag and heard the clinking of the coins inside. This is your pay for having worked so hard all throughout winter in the Royal Academy, and a gift from me to celebrate your marriage. May it help pay for your wedding. You're giving us this much? Hugo asked. Naturally. Since you are going to be accompanying me during spring prayer, as usual, Hugo, you shall get time off work from tomorrow until then. Ella will have time off during spring prayer. It is not an especially long vacation, but sure, use it to prepare for your wedding. I would have liked to give you time off together, however, that was not an option. My apologies. No, thank you. Your consideration is more than we could ever ask for. Preparing for marriage was really quite something. Ella and Hugo needed to rent and furnish a room, as well as prepare for the upcoming winter. The Starbind ceremony was deliberately held in the summer to give newlyweds time to ready themselves. One could sleep without needing a blanket during the warmer months, and food was in enough of an abundance that wages could be used to stock up on firewood. Ella and Hugo already had rooms in the castle and the temple, so if they focused on preparing their bedroom in the lower city and nothing else, they would most likely be able to manage in time. Newlyweds needed cloth for their sheets, comforters, and mattresses, so the fiancé would normally weave it themselves at the start of their winter handiwork, hence why being good at sewing was necessary for me to be considered a beauty. Or for one to be considered a beauty. Because you were working at the Royal Academy, I assume you did not have time to prepare any cloth. Is that correct, Ella? Are you going to be okay, I asked. My mother said she would weave some for me. Good. Ella's mother had apparently decided to help out of concern for how focused her daughter was on her work. If what she ended up making didn't suffice, Ella would make do with second-hand cloth. Hugo had made a point of noting that it didn't matter to him either way, since he wasn't marrying a genuine, generic sewing beauty. Their abrupt lovey-doveyness was amusing to watch, but it was also heartwarming to see them working to prepare for their new life together. I wonder whether I should gift Ella a hairpin the divine color of spring. She'd probably be happier to receive new cooking implements. Ella had spent her coming-of-age ceremony in the nobles' quarter, so she hadn't attended the one in the temple. She would be wearing her fancy outfit for the first time this coming Starbind ceremony, something her mother was no doubt looking forward to. Since Ella was a member of my personnel, the very least I could do was gift her a not-so-expensive hairpin. Once our conversation was over, Ella and Hugo left. Next on my agenda was a pre-meeting with Fran, Zom, and the others on the upcoming ceremonies. There was a week between the winter coming-of-age ceremonies and the spring baptisms, and I was pretty sure I could use this time to relax in the temple. How is the orphanage? Has Conrad adjusted to living there? I asked Monica. She was normally the one to discuss things with Wilma, so she visited the orphanage more than any of my other attendants. After meeting my eyes, Monica stepped forward and began her report. According to Wilma, for the first few days, simply hearing footsteps was enough to send him into a panic. Despite having been raised as a noble, he did not seem to have any attachment to power and authority as many blue priests do. Rather, he seems relieved to have come to the orphanage. The abuse he had suffered in his previous home truly must have been terrible. I sighed, recalling Jonsara and the way Conrad had recoiled upon seeing a Stapp. I could ask for nothing more than for Conrad to live even a bit more peacefully than before. Monica, I would like to see the orphanage and workshop myself. Can you inform Wilma and Gil that I will be visiting tomorrow afternoon? As you wish, Monica nodded, and then disappeared to do just that. Meanwhile, I took out my notes, scanned over what I needed to do here, and then passed a page containing notes on spring prayer for Zom. Or prayer to Zom. I have discussed the splitting of the Central District with Wilfried and Charlotte. Please convey the results to the High Priest. The sooner we know of any potential problems with our schedule, the better. The two of them need time to prepare as well. As you wish, I will also take this opportunity to discuss who will accompany Lady Charlotte for spring prayer. As you are here this year, Lady Rosemine, Fran will not be available for her. Yes, please do. Once Zom had gone, I started looking over the letters that had accumulated on my desk. There were some from the Plantain and Gilberta companies, and even one from Gustav of the Merchants Guild. The latter detailed his results after gathering thoughts from traveling merchants about the state of the lower city, as well as notes on his struggles as he attempted to beautify the place. I shall also report this to Ferdinand and send a reply as soon as possible. Perhaps I will set aside time for that while assisting with his paperwork tomorrow. Fran, I'm going to be writing letters to the Planting Company, the Gilberta Company, and the Merchants Guild. Could you ask Gil to deliver them for me? Fran, who was standing beside my desk, paused for a moment in thought. He then shook his head. Lady Rosemine, should you not spend today resting? You do not look well at the moment. If you are looking for something to keep you busy, perhaps you could try exercising without your magic tools. Yes, she does need to do that. I had thought I was doing fine, so Fran's statement took me by surprise. I placed a contemplative hand on my face, wondering how Ferdinand would expect me to respond to me falling sick despite having returned to the temple and ending up unable to give blessings at the coming-of-age ceremony. In the end, I decided to obediently accept Fran's proposal. Very well, I will spend today resting quietly. Please bring me all the new books that were printed over the winter, I said, requesting new material to read. Fran sighed and then obeyed, although he made sure to reiterate that I needed to rest. The next day marked my return to normal temple life after quite some time. Following my breakfast, I practiced dedication whirling and the harpspiel until third bell. Lady Rosemine, Fran said, it is time for us to go to the High Priest's chambers. Leaving the harpspiel cleanup to Rosina, I departed with Fran, Zom, and Monica. Angelica and Daniel also accompanied me as guards. The former guarded the door with her life, as per usual, while the latter busily took care of all the jobs he was given. It seemed that Ferdinand was buried in a mountain of work after having been away from the temple for so long. Ferdinand, I am sorry to give you yet more work, but I received this letter from the Merchants Guild, I noted, handing him the letter in question. I believe a prompt response is in order. The contents of the letter explained that duchies other than Ehrenfest had something resembling a sewer system using the wriggly slime things found in the toilets in the nobles' quarter. Said sewer system had been invented decades ago, and its growing popularity had resulted in an extreme makeover using the same near-instantaneous method used to construct Haas's monastery. It seemed that the wisest option was to modify the lower city in a similar manner, assuming that doing so wouldn't be too disruptive, but such construction magic could only be used by the Archduke. It wasn't a decision the commoners could make on their own. Considering that this system is already being used in the nobles' quarter, it seems that only our lower city is decades behind the other duchies, I observed. So it would seem. I will pass on the suggestion to the castle, Ferdinand replied. He then wrote out a list of questions, asking when the nobles' quarter had initially been remodeled, whether the blueprints were still available, how much mana it would require to repeat this process with the lower city, and whether they even had enough power to spare. Which he handed to me along with an ordinance. Faystone, send this to Elvira and Charlotte. Elvira is the one responsible for these matters. I can do nothing more than support you as your guardian. I accepted the Faystone and sent the ordinance as instructed. Charlotte and her retainers would presumably do their best investigating the questions. I wish I was being asked to research things in a book room. I returned to my room at fourth bell, had my lunch, and then started writing my response letters. Monica informed me when it was time for divine gifts to be sent to the orphanage, and all the necessary preparations were complete, at which point I headed over there with her, Gil, and my guard knights. Monica and Gil opened the wide set of doors which led to the dining hall where Grey Pride maidens were kneeling in wait. Wilma, I request a report on what has happened over the winter, I instructed. Everyone else may return to their duties. I was informed about not much happened prior to Conrad arriving in the orphanage. Some of the children had caught minor colds, but they had recovered soon after without suffering any worse symptoms. "How is Conrad doing?" I asked. The other Grey Shrine Maidens and I feared he would not fare well in the orphanage after being raised as a noble, but there have been no problems worth mentioning. He was stiff as a board on his first day, but thanks in part to Dirk sticking with him and teaching him about life here, really interacted with babies who were barely able to stand or apprentices who were already baptized and working in the workshop. So he had gladly welcomed Conrad, a boy who was actually his age. By this point, they were running all over the place like two peas in a pod. Delia was apparently having quite a hard time keeping up with them. I feel bad for her. "I would like to check up on Conrad," I said. "Could you summon him and Dirk for me?" As you wish, one must look to a nearby Grey Shrine Maiden who left to speak with the children, reading picture books in the corner. Dirk stood up, his reddish-brown hair bouncing as he grabbed Conrad by the arm and rushed over, Delia following after them. "You called, Lady Rosemine?" Delia asked. "Yes, I came to see Conrad." I turned to the young boy. "How is the orphanage? Is the food tasty? Are you sleeping well?" Conrad smiled, looked around, and then nodded. There was a glimmer in his eyes, which were the same grass-green color as Philene's. From a glance when he first arrived that he had suffered abuse, but now his fear of all those around him had lessened. "Yes, the food is very tasty," Conrad replied. "Also, it's really fun here. There are lots of toys and picture books." Dirk was standing beside him. His auburn hair made him look a lot like Delia, who was respectfully kneeling behind him. And there was a naughty light in his scorched brown eyes. It very much reminded me of all the smug expressions Delia had used to wear. She and Dirk must have resembled each other so closely because they were raised as siblings. "You've been helping Conrad out, haven't you, Dirk?" I asked. "Thank you. I'm relieved to see the two of you becoming fast friends." Dirk and Conrad exchanged a grin, at which point I turned my attention to Delia. Just like Thule, she was no longer a child and was instead a proper young woman. "Delia, I cannot imagine it has been easy, but please continue to do your best at keeping Dirk and Conrad in order." "You may count on me," Delia replied, accepting my request with a smile. This concluded my business in the orphanage, and so I moved to the workshop, relieved to know that things were going well. Fritz, he and I need to discuss matters involving the construction of paper-making workshops in other provinces. Once Fritz arrived, I informed him that paper-making workshops were due to be currently established in several provinces within Airfest, and that I wanted him to select those who would be traveling between them one after another. "So they're going to be visiting several provinces in one trip?" Fritz asked. "Yes, we hope to have as many workshops producing paper as possible. So rather than spending a year developing wholly unique types of paper as we did in Ilgner, we plan to teach them only how to make already existing types," I replied. To this end, Ilgner is going to be sending craftspeople of their own. I went on to explain that when we called the 3 Grey Priests back from Haas during spring prayer, he could request specific priests. "Would y'all be quiet?" We would then establish 2 4-person groups, each of which would include at least one priest who had experience in Ilgner. Those groups will be sent to provinces when they are ready for them, meaning those who progress quickest will be prioritized. We will travel via my high beast, and members of the planting company will accompany us to establish branches of the plant paper and printing guilds, so it will not interfere with their lives that much. How long will they spend in each province? 1 to 2 months under our current schedule. The plan is for the groups to teach each province how to make Bookworm paper, the most basic of all plant paper, and then move on to the next province. Oh, and that reminds me. Please add Achim and Egan to the groups. I would like to advance Operation Grimm alongside the paper-making industry. Operation Grimm had stalled during my long sleep, since the Grey Priests couldn't be sent to other locations in my absence. I wanted them to gather stories while spreading paper-making and printing. "I will pass word to the planting company and discuss extra payment as a reward," I said. "We certainly do want as many stories as possible to make new books," Fritz said with a small smile, agreeing with my plot to mix Operation Grimm into the Gutenberg's trips. Gail, however, gave me a worried look. "I hope the High Priest doesn't get mad about this," he muttered. "Shh, Gail, you must not invite misfortune." "Yeah, don't speak of it or it'll happen." The winter coming-of-age ceremony was the next day, and preparations began early in the morning. I put on my ceremonial high bishop garb, donned my hairpin that was a divine color of winter, and then headed to the chapel. "Guard knights, stand there." I pointed at the wall where Eckert was standing. Angelica's blue eyes hardened. "I want to follow you inside as well. I don't think we can say the chapel is free of danger, and it's not good to be separated from your guard knights," she said, seemingly unsatisfied now that she had learned there were more blue priests we needed to be on guard against. But rules were rules. One could dismiss this as pointless tradition if wanted to, but I couldn't just up and change them on a whim. I will consult the high priest and see if these rules could potentially be changed in the future, I replied. For now, however, I am afraid you will have to give up. Okay, I Duncan conceded with a reluctant nod before going to stand at attention next to Daniel and Eckert. Fran took me to the door where I waited for Ferdinand to announce my entrance. He soon intoned, "The High Bishop shall now enter," at which point 2 grey priests opened the doors for me. Inside on the right were the blue priests, lined up by the shrine, while on the left were the new adults. I entered the chapel, the Bible Fran had given me in my arms, and advanced toward the altar. The atmosphere was alive with the sound of ringing bells and the surprised, muted stirring of the crowd. The blue priests were using magic tools that quieted voices, so no matter how loud the new adults were, their voices were no more than whispers to me. Even so, I heard many similar comments among them. "Hey, look, it's a tiny High Bishop. The High Bishop who can actually give blessings is back. She really is tiny." "Stop calling me tiny. It's the Dream's fault, not mine. I'll get bigger soon." Despite my silent protests, I maintained a flat expression as though I had heard nothing at all. But not all of their murmurs were about my size. Wow, nobles really do wear the Gilberta Company's hairpins. Though that one's way fancier than the ones we use. I heard some of the women whispering about my hairpin. I was struck with the sudden urge to look around and see how popular hairpins were now, but I contained myself. I was better off waiting until after I had climbed up the shrine, since that would give me a much better vantage point. I continued up the stairs, taking care not to step on the hem of my robes and trip, and eventually reached the altar. Once I set down the Bible and spread it open, Ferdinand began to read aloud in his resounding voice. I majestically looked over the chapel while listening to him. People wore white during their baptisms to indicate they had just been born as people, but for the coming-of-age ceremony, those in attendance wore clothing matching the season's divine colors. Since it was winter, they could wear either red or white. Most had chosen red, perhaps because white looked somewhat cold, and almost all of the women were wearing hairpins. Some were decorated with a collection of small flowers, like the first one I made for Thule, while others were more elaborate with large flowers. Flowers didn't bloom during the winter months, so those with winter or ceremonies couldn't simply go to the forest to pick any to wear as ornaments. I had thought back to how overjoyed Frida had been about getting new to our flowers for her baptism. Not many people had worn hairpins at the time, but they had apparently really caught on while I was asleep. The Gilberta Company sure is working hard, huh? I sighed at the thought of just how many days and months had passed, and then it became my turn. It was time to give the new adults a blessing. Now, let us offer our prayers to the gods. Praise be to the gods. The blue priest struck the praying pose, standing on one leg and raising both arms, as did the new adults. I gazed across them all and then poured mana into my ring to give the blessing. O Geduld, goddess of earth, O Abiglade, god of life, hear my prayers. May you grace those who have newly come of age with your blessing. May those who offer their prayers and gratitude be blessed with your divine protection. Once the red and white lights of my blessing had settled, the door leading outside opened. Ferdinand intoned that those who had received my blessing were sure to have bright futures ahead, and with that the new adults began filtering out. I wonder if they're here. I turned my gaze toward the door, hopeful, and saw Dad and Mom looking my way with tearful eyes. They had visibly aged a little over the past 2 years. I smiled, trying to tell them I was doing okay, and Dad replied with a big nod. Wait, Mom and Dad are here, but I don't see Thule or Camille. Are they sick or something? I was really worried, but there was nobody here I could ask for answers, and so the winter coming-of-age ceremony came to an end with my resolving to indirectly ask Letzer Thule the next time I saw them. I'm assuming that Thule had to keep Camille away because Camille would ask questions. That's what I'm assuming is the reason. Because we all know that Camille's gotten to be, 4 at most at this point? Which means his baptism is going to be coming up in a few years. Schwartz's and White's outfits. Ooh, we're going to get this now! The week between the coming-of-age ceremony and the spring baptism was going to be business as usual in the temple. Here than in the castle, but I didn't mind. The lack of tension and scheming made me feel a lot more comfortable. At the high priest chambers, eagerly awaiting fourth bell. I had decided that I was going to spend the rest of the day reading, but then Ferdinand called out to me. Rosamond, do you have plans for this afternoon? Yes, I plan to read. I see. Good then. As you have no plans, so I have just a thing for you. He says she has no plans, even though she wants to read. That's no plans. No. Hold on a second. I just told him that I got plans, right? I do have plans, I protested. Plans to read. Please listen when I speak to you. Reading does not count. Discussing the clothes for the library's magic tools takes much greater priority. Don't decide my priorities for me. Or so I wanted to shout, but when it came to Schwartz and Weiss's outfits, I was the one asking Ferdinand for help. I would suffer the most if my adamance to read pushed him to retract his gesture of goodwill. I hung my head, wallowing in my feelings of defeat and regret. Good, Ferdinand muttered, seemingly having interpreted my display of sadness as a nod. Your workshop shall serve as your workplace. Keep the door open so I'll bring in materials and documents. Fine. Fourth bell chimed, and after finishing lunch, I opened the door to my hidden room as Ferdinand had instructed so that anyone could enter. I gazed longingly at the books on my shelf, the ones I had planned to read, and sighed to myself. Perhaps you will be able to read tomorrow. And you have a meeting with the Gilberto Company scheduled for the day after, Fran said, consoling me with a half smile. His words did cheer me up a little. I had summoned Thule for the day after tomorrow to order a new hairpin. By the way, are you going to order anything other than the hairpin? Monica asked, curiously knowing that I had to discuss my outfits with my attendants in the castle. Chest. I'm also going to order a hairpin to celebrate Ella's marriage, plus some library committee armbands. What exactly are these armbands? These. I spread out a full-size sketch of an armband that I had drawn to show Thule. Incidentally, the part that said library committee member was written in kanji. No one in this world will be able to understand it except me, but I wanted it nonetheless. As far as I was concerned, it was integral to really feeling like a member of the library committee, and above all else, it made me happy. I planned to ask Thule to make 4 differently colored armbands, one for me, one each for Schwartz and Weiss, and one for my new friend Hannelore, who I absolutely wanted to recruit into the library committee as a fellow bookworm. I wouldn't pressure her if she didn't want to join, but the thought of you seeing her, Schwartz, and Weiss working together while wearing matching armbands filled me with joy. I'm going to work on it as a library committee member with a friend once I become a second year, I explained. I can't wait. Oh. As I spoke, a white bird slid through the wall, spun circles around the room, and then settled down on the desk in front of me. Lady Rosemine, this is Elvira. Lady Charlotte has organized answers to your questions. I'm sending them over now, she said. It said thrice. Immediately after, another bird flew into the room and then turned into a letter, which dropped down into my desk. It was less from Charlotte herself and more from the scholars among her retainers, answering my questions about the proposed extreme makeover to the lower city. I started reading through the letter. It seemed that Drawanko had published research on the slimes during the Interduchy tournament, including schematics on how to use them in sewer systems and the like, around 80 years ago. The Duchy's Ob at the time had promptly introduced the slimes to his capital. Then, during the Archduke Conference, he had reported their success in eradicating the city's filth and its lingering stench. He concluded that they had made things easier to manage on the whole and asked the king to introduce them to the Royal Academy dormitory. The king had granted his permission, and so a slime-based sewer system was introduced to the Drawanko dormitory. In the past, it had been standard to dispose of any waste in the surrounding area. This technology removed the need for that, however, and the area around the Duchy's dorm had become a considerably more attractive and comfortable space as a result. After confirming the efficacy of the new slime system, the sovereignty purchased the rights to the technology and used it to beautify both the Royal Academy and the Royal Capital, a development that brought great honor to Drawanko. From there, it became a trend for duchies to undergo similar dramatic renovations. Archdukes would request and purchase the technology during the Archduke Conference, after which it would take a span of years for them to be granted permission, resulting in significant gaps between when different duchies promptly embraced the sewer system. Naturally, trends trickled down from top to bottom. Ehrenfest had been within 5 spaces of the lowermost rank at the time among the lesser duchies, and so it had taken us quite some time to earn permission. It also ultimately wasn't over until over a decade after Drawanko first displayed the power of using slimes that our own dramatic renovation started to take shape. Things did not progress so simply. Ehrenfest had ended up receiving permission at the most inopportune time, right after Gabrielle of Ehrenbach had married into the family. Her husband had been the Archduke candidate, planned to become the next Archduke, so to forestall him causing chaos, he had ended up being granted land from the Central District and installed as the first Count Groschel. He, his wife, and his children, who had been raised as Archduke candidates, all left the city of Ehrenfest at once, causing a massive drop in the total mana quantity of the Archducal family. But even with less mana, it was important to keep up appearances in noble society. Ehrenfest first dramatically renovated their dormitory at the Royal Academy, since it was the place most seen by other duchies. They renovated the Archduke's castle several years later, and then the nobles' quarter several years after that. The lower city was set aside, with renovations planned for whenever the archducal family had enough capacity to spare, but that time ultimately never came to pass. By this point, it was entirely forgotten why the lower city hadn't been renovated. In fact, more and more people from the generation who knew these circumstances to begin with were passing away, such that Charlotte concluded her letter by saying she had decided it necessary to tell Sylvester about all this. Up until now, we had so few exports and merchants from other duchies coming here that it was fine to set the lower city aside, I said. But now that things have changed, we have to do something. But we still didn't have any mana to spare, as far as I knew. The blueprints for the renovations made to the castle and to the nobles' quarter involved creation magic that could only be used by the Archduke, so they were apparently in his document storage room. Sylvester's scholars had checked and confirmed that they were still there. That explains why I didn't know about them despite having made a catalog of everything in the bookroom. I wish I could get permission to go in that storage room too. Lady Rosemary, the High Priestess here. Right. I put away Charlotte's letter and requested that Ferdinand come to my hidden room, which he promptly did. His attendants entered soon after, carrying 3 boxes into my workshop, and then exited, leaving only 6 of us in the workshop. Ferdinand, Justice, Eckert, Angelica, Daniel, and me. Our retainers were here with us because our engagement made it somewhat problematic for me to meet Ferdinand without guards or attendants since he was unmarried. It feels a bit cramped in here with so many people, I observed. My workshop is smaller, and under normal circumstances, the mana restriction would prevent anyone but you from entering. Furthermore, this is the bare minimum. There are going to be even more people in the room when several scholars and attendants gather in the castle to brew this on a larger scale. Ferdinand said with a hint of annoyance. He spread out a cloth on which was a magic circle similar to the one I had seen when he was making the Jareve, and then haphazardly took out a series of mysterious ingredients. Justice took them all and plopped them into a box one after another. Edgar pulled out various documents from one of the boxes and spread them on the work table, having already received his instructions. These papers apparently covered the results of Ferdinand and Herscher's research. Eckert, may I look at them? I asked. You will see more than your fill of them later. Now move your head, you're in the way. Eckert said, his voice several degrees colder than usual due to him being in the middle of following Ferdinand's orders. He shooed me away, then returned to spreading out yet more documents. Well, that's cold. Lady Rosemary, you shouldn't get in the way when people are busy. At times like this, it's best to step back and not say anything. That way everything will end up ready on its own, Angelica said, imparting to me the wisdom she had received from her parents. The best way for you to help is do nothing at all. In retrospect, I did seem to recall Angelica stepping back and watching over us with a smile whenever we started talking about things unrelated to brute force. It was evidently a method for broadcasting one's lack of involvement. Thanks to the situation, I had learned yet another piece of weird trivia about Angelica. Ferdinand, do call me when everything is ready. I said I had nothing to do there myself and was just going to be treated like I was in the way, so I decided to leave and read as planned. Angelica was surprised to hear this, but she was the last person I wanted to hear criticism from, considering that she was standing in a corner of the workshop and focusing inward to stealthily train her enhancement magic. First, look at this, Ferdinand said, pointing at the document sprawled atop the work desk. After announcing that I knew it was improper behavior, I climbed up onto a chair and got on my knees so that I could peer over the table. There were 10 sheets of paper with complexly drawn magic circles on them, and one larger sheet that showed the resulting magic circle when they were all laying on top of one another. I had no idea what the magic circles meant, but Angelica's eyes started to sparkle when she saw them. Lord Ferdinand, can I embroider this circle on my cape too? She exclaimed. It seemed that she needed this permission of whomever had initially modified and therefore invented the magic circle. Angelica's sudden request made Ferdinand blink with surprise. Are you capable of embroidery when you cannot even use a calculator? He asked. I can do it. This magic circle is amazing. Please give me permission to embroider it onto my cape, Angelica said, her eyes positively radiating sparkles. Her begging was at full power, and she looked entirely like a beautiful young princess with a particular fondness for sewing. I will grant you permission if you prove useful in making these outfits. Now assist with the embroidery of this section. You may count on me. I thought Angelica was crippled by her lack of brain cells, but she actually has a ton of girl power. She beats even me. As I slumped my shoulders in despair over losing to Angelica so soundly, Ferdinand continued. The library's magic tools have protective magic circles woven deftly into their outfits. You know this already from what I understand. I do. Herscher and I managed to improve their designs through our research, and we will now be making new outfits for them. We must prepare the ingredients, brew them, and then create the necessary materials, he said, then going on to mutter, I would rather continue researching Schwartz and Weiss as Herscher is, but these outfits are the highest priority. I agreed with that. The last thing I wanted was for him to finish his research and then completely lose interest in helping me make the outfits. He could research Schwartz and Weiss to his heart's content after our work here was done. Will we need to go on another journey to collect the ingredients, I asked. No, I have all the ingredients we need, he said. We would not make it in time for the next term of the Royal Academy if we took the time to go gathering. As master of the tools, we need your mana to create threads for the magic circles and phase stones for storing mana. Won't supplying all these ingredients burden you, Ferdinand? I will consider it an acceptable trade as long as I am giving the clothes they used to wear in return. I wish to research their cloth and thread, and this should not be an issue since the new outfits are going to have just as many phase stones as the old ones, Ferdinand said with a smile that conveyed his true intentions. That was precisely why he hadn't brought their old outfits here with him. No doubt he would retrieve the leftover materials after the new outfits were made and start dissecting the old clothes to investigate the materials of the previous owner, or the magecraft of the previous owner. Can we not use the existing phase stones for their buttons at least, I asked? If we just moved the buttons over, we wouldn't need to use as many ingredients nor brew as many materials. I thought it would save us time and mana, but Ferdinand shook his head at my suggestion. They would not be unusable, but in terms of mana efficiency, it is far better for you to replace them with phase stones of your own. Librarians may be able to go to the library whenever they please, but you cannot. That is why you will want the phase stones to be as effective as possible. You would not want the two magic tools to run out of mana and become immobile midway through their work, would you? I shook my head. I certainly intended to exploit the need to refill their mana to visit the Royal Academy's library on several occasions between spring and autumn, but I didn't want Schwartz and Weiss to end up immobile if something waylaid me. Solange will probably be shocked and saddened if they suddenly stop working again. As for fashioning the outfits, we will begin with making the thread for embroidering the magic circles, Ferdinand explained. You will need to do the embroidering yourself as the tool's master, which I imagine will take some time. Excuse me? I have to do all the embroidery? I exclaimed, paling at the very suggestion. Hersher had said that all those in Ehrenfest would need to band together for this, so I had planned to ask a noble daughter with an immense amount of girl power and impressively graceful sewing skills to handle it for me. Others can do the embroidery, which disguises the magic circles in this area. As their master, you will only need to do the magic circles themselves. Only? But there are so many, I balked. He had pointed to all 10 of the individually drawn magic circles, which were so complex and detailed that the very thought of embroidering even one made me feel queasy. And I had to finish them all before next winter? No way, I didn't have the time for that. Despite how grueling it may seem, I fused some of the magic circles while improving them, so there are fewer than there used to be. And the magic tools need charms of this strength to be protected. This is your job as their master. Do it well. Can we not just draw the magic circles on? If we use a mana die of sorts, they'll work just as well, won't they, I asked. Drawing the magic circles will still end up being a pain, but not as much of a pain as embroidering them. Ferdinand considered my request for a moment before shaking his head. Embroidering secures the circles to the cloth more reliably than anything. Dyes cannot handle precise lines and instead spread through the cloth. Since you would need ink of a great enough mana quantity, it would end up being more wasteful than simply making thread. Then what about using paste to stop the dye from spreading as per the Yuuzhan process? Yuuzhan? Ferdinand repeated. What is this paste you are referring to? A resisting agent, I said, trailing off. I had described it as the Yuuzhan process, but I had actually been thinking of rice paste. And on second thought, we probably couldn't make rice paste here. We would want something to use in its place. If we can't use rice paste, what can we use? Hold on, is the Yuuzhan process just impossible here? What ingredients can I get right away? Oh, resist dyeing using wax might work. Wax is going to be the easiest to understand and prepare, I said with a smile, hiding the panic that I was feeling on the inside. Wax, as in the wax used in the candles that light the temple, Ferdinand asked. In the castle with its many attendants, large rooms like the Grand Hall were lit with a combination of candles and light-amplifying magic tools, while individual rooms simply used magic tools, which were the most common light source. I was used to candles from living in the lower city, but to Ferdinand they were the most part localized within the temple. Yes, we draw lines with heated, melted wax. Wax hardens when it cools, does it not? That will stop the dye from seeping into the lines. Oh, you can use wax like that? Justice interjected. His voice was bright, and he wore an excited grin at having learned what he thought was lower city knowledge. At this rate, he would no doubt start looking there in search of other ways to use wax. Oh no, I need to teach this to the Gilberta Company ASAP. I say we use dyeing instead. My embroidering skills are terribly lacking to the point that I simply cannot see myself completing all the circles by winter, I said, conscious that my work in the temple and with the printing industry meant my time was scarce. If we take the dyeing route, however, I can just recover my mana with potions. Consider learning to embroider your duty as a bride and give it your all, Ferdinand replied dryly. Then we shall cancel my engagement. If I don't get married, I don't have to practice sewing. Do not be foolish. You know by now that such a decision will not be permitted. I know, I just said what came to mind. Doing so will allow others to exploit you. Take more care in what you say. Right, I replied while picking up one of the sheets with a magic circle on it. This looks like it would be harder for me to reproduce even with a pen. I really don't think I can embroider these designs. They're just too detailed and complex for me. There are dyes we could use instead to imbue the cloth with mana, no? A dye that will properly dye something with mana. Perhaps we could use your blood. Ferdinand proposed, his tone dry and intimidating. I paled, thinking back to the time I had to use my blood to sign magic contracts in my commoner days. Absolutely not. That sounds painful and also extremely terrifying. It was a joke. That was a joke? Really? Ferdinand made a joke. Wow. I expect Ehrenfest's reputation would suffer if we were to give the magic tools of royalty blood-stained clothes to wear. It doesn't sound at all like a joke when you say it, Ferdinand. Regardless, creating ink with enough mana to compare to blood will need enormous quantities of mana to brew. That's fine with me. Anything is better than embroidery. I wish I had enough mana to say such things, Daniel said with a small groan, having far too little mana for such reckless spending, even since compressing his mana. I scoffed, dismissing his envy with a sniff, and then returned to pleading for Ferdinand to accept ink as an alternative. I refused to budge on this. It was literally impossible for me to embroider all the magic circles. If you make me embroider these, you'll bring shame to all of Ehrenfest, I declared. Good grief, what terrible blackmail. Things truly do never go as planned with you, Ferdinand grumbled. Even so, I triumphantly clenched my fist. As long as I didn't have to embroider, I considered it my victory. Magic ink. Since we had decided that we were going to be making ink, Ferdinand began his lecture on brewing things. The ingredients one can acquire from fey creatures such as fey plants and fey beasts have elemental properties. Green is the color for water, and the other elements likewise match the divine colors of the gods. You all know all this already, I imagine. Yes, it was taught during my first year of written classes, I replied. As Ferdinand had said, green was the color for water. There were also blue for fire, yellow for wind, red for earth, white for life, black for darkness, and gold for light. First years learned all this alongside the names of the gods, but I had known it even before then thanks to having read the Bible. I imagine that most people knew it as a matter of course, considering its relation to the birth seasons. Correct, Ferdinand said once I had given my full explanation. Subsequently, the button... Subsequently, the boons of the ingredients also connect to the gods. This is second-year material, right? I asked. I learned it all while making textbooks. In regards to the elements, water could provide healing, cleansing, and change. Fire could provide attack, amplification, and growth. Wind could provide defense, speed, and knowledge, and earth could provide fortitude, resilience, and diffusion. The boons related to the specialties of their respective gods. It had been written in textbooks that earth could be mixed with any other element, so it was used to mix together elements that otherwise wouldn't really merge well on their own. In contrast, life generally backfired when mixed with any other element, so it was hard to use it in combination. As some additional trivia, in the same way that one person can contain several elements within themselves, some ingredients had multiple elements. It was easier to combine elements that generally weren't compatible if one just used ingredients that contained both elements to begin with. Different ingredients have different mana capacities, which affects how much mana one can use while brewing with them. If you wish to acquire high-quality ingredients with many elements and a high mana capacity, then you must gather from mana-rich fey creatures, as you know. I nodded, thinking back to the powerful fey beasts we had fought when making the Dereve. I knew that fey stone quality differed greatly depending on the strength of the defeated creature. The ink we are about to make will require ingredients with the elements and capacities necessary to fully absorb your mana. Consequently, as all magic ink is subordinate to the goddess of wisdom, it will need to primarily contain wind, Ferdinand said while rummaging through a box in search of something. Apparently the brewing was going to be different from what was planned for the thread. We shall add an effect-amplifying blue ingredient to a mana-rich as mana-rich of a yellow ingredient as possible. Then we will add a red ingredient to raise its resistance, Ferdinand continued in a mutter while lining up dried roots, powders, and liquids, none of which I recognized. I had no idea which elements each were, nor what functions they served. Ferdinand, how can you tell which ingredients is which element? Using this magic tool, Ferdinand replied. He brought over a disc that was radially split into the colors of the elements, at the center of which was a mysterious metallic plate about 5 centimeters in diameter that shone with all 7 colors. It also had concentric circles drawn at 3 centimeter intervals from the center, making it look fairly similar to a dartboard. You need only rest the ingredient on this. Give it a try. As instructed, I cut off a small part of the dried root and placed it on the disc-shaped magic tool. The instant the root touched the central plate, light started to fill the yellow part of the tool. At the same time, a small part of the blue portion showed as well. Eep, it started shining. So does this mean the ingredient is strong with wind and contains some fire too? Yes. One can also measure its mana capacity for each element based on how far the light travels, Ferdinand explained. If the light stopped at the smallest circle, the ingredient didn't have a sizable capacity for that element, but the farther the light stretched out beyond that point, the bigger its capacity was. The fact that the yellow light had stretched almost to the very edge of the disc meant that the ingredient had an exceedingly large capacity for storing wind magic. This is fun. So what about this one? I asked, reaching for some of the powder, but Ferdinand shot his hand out and grabbed my wrist to stop me. Wait, Rosemine, the plate must be cleansed each time for the measurement to be accurate, he said. Take great care to remember this. You have a tendency to pay no heed to such details. Justice whisked out his staff and cleansed the essential plate for us at once, and only then was it returned to the disc. Ferdinand, I wish to learn the cleansing spell I requested. It seems convenient. You already attempt to do too much on your own. You may entrust cleansing to your attendants. Do not steal the work of those around you. Do you not do the cleansing yourself when you lock yourself up in your workshop experimenting? I asked, puffing out my cheeks in protest. I seem to recall Justice saying that even he hadn't been able to get inside. Ferdinand waved a hand, looking exceedingly annoyed. All knights know the spell. Have Daniel teach it to you later. We do not have time for it right now. Lord Ferdinand, you want me to teach her? Daniel asked, worried. Ferdinand replied with a brisk nod. She has only 2 guard knights with her now, and considering who the other is, it should be clear why it must be you. Right, Daniel is amazing. He tutored me for my written classes, Angelica said, her cheeks blushing with a hint of shyness as she praised him. At a glance, she came across as a young maiden whose heart had begun to throb for her tutor, but that wasn't the case whatsoever. She was just doing her absolute best to avoid doing work she wasn't good at. Daniel had learned not to be fooled by Angelica's picturesque expressions while tutoring her, and so he just sighed, saying not to worry and that he would take care of it. Ferdinand, what's this liquid? Is it oil? I asked, shaking one of the jars a little and watching as the thick liquid inside slopped around. If my suspicion were correct and it was of a particularly high quality, it might have been worth supplying the ink workshop with some. Yes, it is oil from a Kurhai's fey plant, Ferdinand replied. Is Kurhai's perhaps the evolved form of an ice plant? It is, but how do you know of ices? As a first year, you should have neither brewed nor gathered them, so why do you know of a fey plant that I cannot recall having taught you? Ice was one of the oils we had used back in my commoner days to make colored ink. Since Kurhai's was its evolved form, it probably shared the same properties, if not also the same mana capacity. Ice is strong with wind, isn't it? What of it? That must mean linseed is fire, mish is water, and pedant is earth, right? I do not understand what you are getting at here. If there is something that you wish to say, be more direct in saying it, Ferdinand insisted with a glare. I went on to tell him that the colored ink that the Gutenbergs had made in the ink workshop. The ingredients we had used hadn't ended up producing the colors we expected, and it was only after much struggling that we managed to get a grip on things. I see, those problems were no doubt being caused by the elements. We use the term fey when speaking of things that have large quantities of mana and can provide fey stones. But all things that live atop land suffused of mana contain mana, however slight the actual amount may be. Commoners are no exception, and this is exactly why contract magic uses blood, which contains the highest density of mana. Oh, I see. In short, if we could give Heidi and the others a magic tool for investigating elements, their research would most likely progress much faster. Ferdinand, how much would this magic tool cost, I asked. It is not for sale. If you want one, make it yourself. Well, I don't know how to make one. Wait, so you made this one as well? Then make one for me too, please. I refuse. It is exceedingly difficult to carefully match the qualities of phase stones, extract pure elements from them, and prepare for all the elements to react to such microscopic amounts of mana. I will teach you how to make one, but if you must do it on your own, Ferdinand said. I decided to give up before I had even begun anything complicated enough to warrant Ferdinand calling it exceedingly difficult. I was almost guaranteed to be way beyond me. It would have been nice to have one, but ink research could still progress either way. Sorry, Heidi, I didn't have it in me to make such a difficult magic tool. Still, regardless of how the quality your ingredients were, it is impressive that commoners were able to perform successful research and produce such reliable results. My Gutenbergs are something else, I replied smugly. I am told that ink is to Heidi, the Gutenberg craftsman, and books are to Lady Rosemine, just added with a small smile. The Gutenbergs being raised by Lady Rosemine are eccentrics who are all specialists in their respective fields. I see, Ferdinand murmured. So there are many other Rosemines, all with unique obsessions. I understood. He just accepted that? Enough chatter, let us begin making the ink. What we'll be making now is a reproduction of the ink sold to commoner merchants for magic contracts, Ferdinand said. It seemed that the ink Benno used for this purpose was made when a brewer moved their mana into a phase stone and purified it of elements and colors, such that it would react even to the slightest amount of mana in commoner blood. That seems surprisingly tedious, I observed, and upon being told that we nobles didn't need this ink since we could just write with magic tool pens, I suddenly realized something. Can't I just write on the cloth directly with a magic tool pen instead of using ink? No, we want your mana to fill the cloth as much as possible to increase its effectiveness. The magic circle will not form it if it is made with the same mana and ends up mixing together. The explanation didn't make much sense to me, but it seems we needed to make highly viscous ink so that the mana wouldn't mix together. At the same time, we needed the mana density of the ink to be higher than that of the cloth. I can't say I really understand, so I'll just follow your instructions. When it came to making magic ink, the fundamental process was the same as making a derive. Add the ingredients in the pot in a particular order and then stir together with a brewing stick. That said, unlike when we had made the derive, I transformed my staff into a brewing utensil rather than using any brewing magic tools. Slice this into small pieces with a knife. You have learned to morph your staff, yes? I hope you have not already forgotten what you were taught in your lessons at the Royal Academy, Ferdinand said with a sharp look. I remember them, I replied, taking out my staff. Messer. After morphing my staff into a knife, I started chopping the root into chunks as instructed. I had been a little nervous about trying to slice through such a dried-out root, but perhaps due to the fact that I was actually cutting it with mana, there wasn't much resistance. I started enthusiastically cutting away, only for Angelica to peel over with interest. You're really good, considering this is your first time brewing. This is not my first time. I have helped Ferdinand before. You helped not just with the paperwork, but with brewing too? That's amazing. I mean, I did help make the derive, but I learned how to chop ingredients from cooking back on Earth and in the lower city. I changed the subject with a laugh, but everyone who knew of my lower city origins collectively fixed me with a glare. Though he didn't actually say it out loud, I was positive that Ferdinand was calling me a fool. I said Rucken to cancel the transformation of my staff. Shut up! God, shut up! You want me to call your mama? From there, I began weighing the ingredients on a scale. Once they were all ready, we could start brewing. This brewing pot will do what should do for today, Ferdinand said, taking out a pot that looks similar to a small saucepan. We will begin by putting in the highest quality ingredients which will serve as the base. Right. I added the chopped up root first of all. Then I challenged Bayman to turn my staff into a mixing stick. Due to my previous experience brewing, I ended up making it even taller than me, which prompted Ferdinand to rub his temple. Whoops. You fool. A mixing stick that large would never work with a pot this small. Think of something small, shorter, and easy to use. Right. I recomposed myself and tried again, canceling the transformation with Rucken and then morphing it into a mixing stick of an appropriate size for the small pot. Stir, 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 stir. I just need to put the next ingredient in when the first one melts, right? I asked. Yes, put the ingredient into the pot in this order. Ferdinand said as he lined them up on the work table. After the root that would serve as the base, I poured in the Karhai's oil and stirred it into the mix. From there, I will be adding the blue powder to amplify the mana in the ink, and then a bit of the red liquid to secure the ink to the cloth. Last was the golden powder obtained from overfilling phase stones of mana, which was going to be used to increase the mana density. Stir, 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 stir. Whether due to the quality of the ingredients or the increased efficiency of using a snap as a mixing stick, the chopped up root dissolved pretty quickly. I poured in the karhais and resumed stirring. Stir, 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 stir. I mixed in the blue powder, stirred even more, dumped in the liquid, and then continued on stirring. I could feel a surprising amount of my mana being drained. Stir, 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 stir. Ferdinand, I'm starting to get tired even with enhancement magic. It is almost ready. You are the one who insisted on making ink, so see it through to the end, Ferdinand replied. A beat later, the surface of the concoction flashed with a light. What was that? Was that it? No, there's one more step. This powder was made with your mana. It should do well to increase the mana density. I mixed in the golden dust as instructed and continued to stir until the surface of the liquid flashed again. Now it is done, Ferdinand said. Transfer the liquid into this jar. Take care not to spill any. As I per his instructions, I started moving the finished ink, which had ended up just as blue as the kind Benno used for magic contracts. My excitement for my homemade ink was shooting up. Ferdinand, can I try writing with it? I asked. Yes, we will want to see just how much it bleeds. I momentarily exited my workshop to ask Fran whether he had any spare cloth we could use for experimental writing. There wasn't any that we could freely waste, so to speak, but he brought some at once when I requested something that could also be used as a rag. I returned to my workshop and spread the cloth onto my work desk. Then I tried drawing a line with the newly made ink. It appeared just fine. In fact, it was shockingly clean. I observed it for a while, and not only did the ink not bleed at all, but it actually puffed up a little on the line. It was like a trail left by one of the especially wet markers I had used back in my Arano days. What in the world? Ferdinand remarked. It's not bleeding in the slightest. Seems like we won't need a resisting agent after all. All the thoughts in my head of asking Les to prepare pliable wax for resist dyeing, of making wax on my own, and of possibly developing my own rice paste all vanished in the mist once again. It is too early to say that. We will only know for sure once we have tried it on cloth infused with your mana, Ferdinand said. His brows knit in a hard frown as he stared at the line. Why do you look so dissatisfied? I am not dissatisfied. I am simply confused, as we seem to have created something other than what I expected. I would have considered my newly made ink a success as long as the puffy line didn't break off over time. But Ferdinand didn't seem the slightest bit convinced. Rosemine, dye this cloth with your mana. I wish to see whether the ink will function similarly with mana-dyed cloth. I used up quite a bit of my mana making the ink, so I am rather tired, I replied. As far as I was concerned, we had achieved what we needed to, and it was time for us to move on. That must have been clear on my face because Ferdinand gave me a look tinged with concern. It was only momentary, however, and vanished as he raised an eyebrow at me. Then drink this potion. Your mana will recover speedily. Not sick of that, I can do it. I'm doing it. I declared pushing myself a little harder was vastly superior to suffering another dose of that ultra-nasty potion. Stir, 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 stir. I continued to stir while Ferdinand threw me ingredient after another into the pot. He eventually added the red liquid, which made the surface of the concoction flash, then took out and cut in half an experimental piece of cloth. He dipped one of the halves into the pot, and it sucked up the liquid inside in an instant. Eek! But despite having sucked up the liquid, the cloth didn't change color, nor did it appear at all wet. It looked exactly the same as the cloth we had just drawn a line on. It doesn't seem any different. Is it really dyed of my mana now? Yes, a touch to clear your doubts. I gripped the cloth and then let out a wow. No sooner had I touched it than it had started to shine faintly. It reacts to your mana the most because that is what it is dyed with. Of course, it will react to the mana of others as well. Dyeing cloth in such a fashion makes it easier for one's mana to flow through the embroidery, which in turn makes it more effective. Neat! It seemed that dyeing cloth with mana wasn't too hard on itself. Both Angelica and Daniel had apparently done it with their capes at one point. Now, see if that ink still works, Ferdinand said. At his instruction, I drew the same line as before. The ink swelled up over time, much like it had done before, and drawing on it felt exactly like drawing on ordinary cloth. Seems like it's fine. But why? Ferdinand asked, taking the pen from me in sheer confusion, and drawing a line with his own mana. His lines seemed to break off at the edge, and the ink didn't swell very much. It seems like the ink bleeds when you draw with it, Ferdinand. I wonder why. I do not know. Here, Eckert, you try. Yes, sir, Eckert said. He drew a similar line, but his bled far more and didn't swell at all. He then handed the pen to Justice, who was eager to try it for himself, but Justice's line bled as well. In fact, it seemed to bleed more than Eckert's had. By this point, Ferdinand had progressed from a furrowed brow to a full-on frown. Angelica, Daniel, I want the both of you to try as well. Yes, sir. My two guard knights were the next ones to try, and their lines continued to the trend by bleeding even more than anyone else's thus far. The one that Daniel drew was the absolute worst. It looked as though he had just spilled ink over the cloth. Is it perhaps based on the quantity of the writer's mana, I suggested, or perhaps its elements and qualities? I must do further research to be sure. Rosemine, may I have this ink? Ferdinand asked, his mad scientist switch now entirely in the on position. The ingredients had been his in the first place, and as long as it didn't interfere with his life too much, I saw no reason to oppose him locking himself away in his workshop for a while. You may, if you promise to research only after eating and have to have left your workshop by third bell tomorrow, I said. Ferdinand glared at me with an annoyance, but I wasn't about to spend every morning waiting to get called over to drag him out of his workshop. I would protect my reading time to the full extent of my abilities. Very well, he conceded. Just have the attendants prepare food. I will finish what work I can before then, and, Daniel, I will entrust cleanup here to you. Sir? Leaving Daniel to his confusion, Ferdinand took the bottle of ink and promptly exited with Justice and Eckert. But why me? Daniel asked, still dumbfounded. Probably because Angelica would end up breaking everything, I suggested. Professor Herscher did always yell at me about that, but why does Lord Ferdinand know that? Angelica asked. I returned an awkward smile, not wanting to reveal that anyone could have guessed it simply by watching her for a day, and then looked at Daniel. He must want you to teach me cleansing magic now as well. Ah, true, that is possible. And so Daniel taught me the cleansing spell while we were in the workshop. It wasn't complicated at all. I merely had to take out my staff and chant Washin while infusing it with mana. It takes an extraordinary amount of mana if you don't have water, but you need not even consider that manner of problem. Daniel said with a head shake. It appeared that he had struggled to cleanse things at all in the past, although his increased mana capacity meant he now found it much less troublesome. I suppose I will clean all these implements at once, I said, eyeing the work table while infusing my staff with mana. I then shouted, Washin, and in an instant the entire workshop was flooded with water. The sudden current swept me up from the floor and spun me around such that I could no longer tell up from down. My eyes opened wide, and while I was quite literally drowning in my confusion, the water suddenly vanished. God, they're both so, what the fuck? Gravity suddenly dragged my once floating body back down to the floor, where Daniel was conveniently placed to break my fall. He had also been sucked into the torrent and ended up lying on his back. Gah, Daniel grunted as it slammed down into his stomach. The fact that he still mustered a polite, "Are you hurt?" between violent coughs was yet another reminder that he was a paragon of virtuous guard knights. Angelica was also sputtering as she recovered from the sudden water attack, and she was blinking rapidly in surprise. The water had already gone, and we were all bone dry, but the sensation of having been drowning remained. I had experienced it myself not too long ago. Lady Rosemine, why did you summon that much water? Daniel asked. I averted my gaze as I rested my body against his, not wanting to meet his exhausted glare. Only now do I understand the extent to which the quantity of mana used will change the amount of water, I said. I will take more care in the future. May cleansing magic be feared. Rosemine, apologies, but if you have no plans this afternoon, would you mind my visiting your workshop? Ferdinand asked when I went to assist him with paperwork the next day. What? It seems he had spent the previous evening locked in his workshop, experimenting with using the ink on all sorts of paper, cloth, and wood, only to learn that all the lines had disappeared when he later woke from a nap. My appreciation for him having kept his promise by leaving his workshop at third bell faded rapidly. In actuality, he had been impatiently waiting to see what had happened to all the lines on the cloth we had left with the line of the cloth we left in my workshop. The ink disappears. I don't mind you visiting my workshop, but if it really is gone, won't it be unusable? If the ink is unusable, you would need only cease your futile struggle and embroider the circles like everyone else. It will not be an issue in the least. But I made the ink specifically because I don't want to do that. How can you be so mean? And so I started making my way to my workshop with Ferdinand, my reading time having been stolen away from me once again. It was sad to lose it, although I had to admit I was also quite curious about the ink. We entered my workshop, which was clean from the incident the day before, and Daniel took out the box containing the cloth we had all drawn on. The cloth he took out, however, had absolutely nothing written on it. Not my line, nor anybody else's. It really did vanish, Daniel observed. No! Now I have to embroider it! This is going to take forever! Feeling defeated and depressed, I went to take the cloth. The very instant my fingers touched it, however, it started to shine. All the lines that everyone had drawn suddenly reappeared, bleeding and all. What in the world is going on? This is unbelievable, Ferdinand muttered, narrowing his eyes and staring at the cloth. I spread it out for everyone to see and shrugged. If not even you can understand it, Ferdinand, then I certainly won't be able to, I said. Everyone else nodded in agreement. If not even Lord Ferdinand touching it brought any change, the lines must only appear in response to Lady Rosemine's mana. Justice said, looking at equally as intrigued as Ferdinand as he eyed the cloth. Lady Rosemine, may I borrow it for a moment? I gave the cloth to Justice, and the lines faded away. I touched it again, and they reappeared. Will they also respond to face stones filled with your mana, I wonder? Ferdinand mused aloud. If so, the ink is still usable. Although it will mean that only you can draw a usable magic circle with it, still, how in the world does this work? Ferdinand, might I suggest you perform any further experience... Further experiments with ink made with your own mana. It would only slow you down to constantly ask for my help, would it not? It was Ferdinand who had prepared the brewing ingredients and measured their quantities in the first place. He could make his own ink and experiment as much as he wanted. If my ink could make functioning magic circles, I didn't care about anything else. A good point. Now, if you'll excuse me, with that, Ferdinand promptly exited my workshop. Yeah, that's right. Get out of here. I'm not going to hang around a mad scientist forever. I started reading as per my initial schedule. My plan was to tell the Gilberta Company about resist dying since I had gone out of my way to remember it. It wasn't something that I expected to have much use for personally, but maybe it could help Mom, who was a dyer by trade. Okay, I'm going to have to end this off here, and I'll see you guys next time.